just to get started, before we get into more details about language development, I wanted to just have a few different terms that we tend to use when we talk about language development in children who speak multiple languages. So what you see on the left is the terms bilingual, multilingual, plurilingual. And very often when I'm with a group of people and I say, well, raise your hand if you are bilingual, no one raises their hand, because there's this idea that you have to be equally fluent in two languages or extremely fluent in two languages to be considered bilingual. So the terminology can be, confusing sometimes, but in general, just for the sake of our conversation today and like the information sharing that you may be doing after, the term bilingual does not mean that you're equally fluent in two languages. It doesn't mean that you're native in two languages. So I am bilingual, but I'm not a native speaker of English. Irish speakers who grew up in the Gaeltacht are likely to be bilingual. Someone who is a native speaker of two languages, like someone in the Gaeltacht, but has more proficiency in one than the other, is still bilingual. If you can only read 3 words on a menu and the words are pizza and pasta, and that's all that you can do, then you're not bilingual. So we use the term bilingual to refer to people who can interact and exchange age-appropriate information, conversation, communication in 2 languages. When there's 3 or more, we talk about multilingual, plurilingual, depending on what we're talking about. We have then, what I think is really important, we have simultaneous bilinguals. And these are the children who are growing up from pretty much from birth or from a very young age, speaking 2 languages. And a simultaneous bilingual, again, could be considered, or is often considered, as a native speaker of both languages. But we find that very often one language is stronger than the other or more dominant than the other. And then we have the word EAL, which many of you are familiar with, which is English as an additional language. But I also wanted to introduce the word successive bilingual, or second language learner, which is someone who is learning or becoming bilingual by learning one language after another. So for example, you develop English as a first language and you learn Irish as a second language. So you are a successive bilingual, or in education settings, some people tend to call it EAL. Successive bilingual applies to all languages because not every second language learner is learning English as an additional language. And many children in your settings might have 3 or more languages. So that's something to bear in mind. I think it's also very important that we focus on this idea of the dominance of one language over the other. It's quite likely that children might be stronger in one language for a specific reason. Maybe at a very, very early stage, they might be more dominant in the language of the family, which is what they've heard the most. It might be common for children who enter primary school to start to really build friendships and relationships, and suddenly their dominant language becomes English, or the language of schooling. So this idea of a dominant language is really something that fluctuates in time as children develop, as children socialize. So it's not fixed, it's not something that stays with the child forever.